What's going on, everybody? How you doing today? Luke Marino, trying to get Miss Suzane connected right now. So hang tight with us for just a moment. Um, we're having a little bit of technical difficulties getting her to connect via video, and we'll work with you guys in just a moment on that. In the meantime, I think we may have Suzane.
I am here, but
Hey.
I don't know what's going on with my camera.
That's okay. We'll make it work.
Make sure it's properly connected and not being used by another application. So I signed out of my Zoom. I signed out of WebEx. I've done all of that, and oh, this is crazy.
It's all right. We'll make it work. This is the good part about working with good people and good friends, and having good people that want to hang out with us is that we can kind of work around some of these issues and overcome them pretty easily. So, how's your day been going, Miss Suzane?
Oh, listen, amazing, amazing, amazing. Just good things all the way around today. You know what makes me really happy and excited?
What's that?
I've been beating away at a problem, and suddenly I find the key to the problem, and I just get like really, really excited. So today was a good news day, but because of a problem that I solved with something I was trying to get done.
Awesome. Yeah, that's pretty cool, huh?
It is. It is. It's a great feeling, isn't it?
Yes. I wish
So,
I could have that feeling more often. My problems take forever to fix.
so you can't see me, but I'm wearing my Winnipeg Jets hat and my Jets jersey because I just want to say, "Go Jets, go!" we did, we did a sweep of the Edmonton Oilers, and we won that in overtime, beating them 4-3. So really excited. Winnipeg is hopping, buzzing, buzzing, buzzing right now.
Yeah. So, hey, look, for those that are on the line right now, we do have a few people watching us live. If you haven't been to Winnipeg, you don't really understand how excited they get about these things. It's kind of like, I think about when I was back in Tampa Bay visiting during the Tampa Bay Lightning's first Stanley Cup. The place was going nuts. I'm assuming it's kind of
it, it just vibrates. It vibrates off of the all of the foundation when it comes to Winnipeg Jets.
that's awesome. So I do want to give us a chance to talk a little bit about you before we start talking about asset information management, which is something that obviously Suzane is an expert on, and people like me get to mess with the stuff, but we don't teach it. Tell us a little bit about how long you've been in Winnipeg and what you kind of got going on there in the local community there with the asset management.
So I think a lot of exciting things are happening right now. Me personally, I've been in Winnipeg for going 5 years, and my company has been here for over 2 years. So that's headed to 2.5 years, I think. So that's really big for us that we survived the first year, and then cut across the pandemic, and we're still here, still standing. So that's exciting. We're also growing as well. We're gonna be looking to hire somebody else again to add to the team. So that's like really exciting for us. Of course, we're looking for the right talent, but more on that will come when we actually post that. Other than that, I'm also, as you know, I've been involved with PMAC, and now I'm involved with the Institute of Asset Management, the Manitoba branch. So we just had our first meeting, our first kickoff meeting, which was really, really well attended. I think Manitoba showed up and really supported. I think asset management is something that Manitoba herself is really becoming passionate about. A lot of infrastructure, equipment, and plant they're all going in all over the place, and so I think it's becoming apparent, I believe, to people that asset management is needed to tie everything together. So all of that is happening right now in Manitoba, and we're just happy to be a part of that huge landscape. We're a small part of it, but we're just happy to be a part of what is happening.
Yeah, that's pretty exciting stuff. I think this is one of those situations where, you're in the right place at the right time, right? Like there's this expanding infrastructure investment in Manitoba, and you've just got so much value to offer the people that are surrounding you. So it's super cool that you can do that. And of course, we like to nerd out on all this asset management stuff, and other people are embracing it. So I think it's fantastic that they've got access to you as their mentor and partner in that adventure, right?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And love the people who are loving you. So I'm truly happy to be here.
Excellent. So look, I dragged Suzanne in here to talk about asset information management. I could ask her to talk about anything. And she can do it, right? She can. The lady knows her stuff. She's been around the world. She's got the full asset management spectrum covered. But I'm a little selfish in my request for asset information management because I've recently been able to observe some of Suzanne's asset information management course, and I've read much of her writing on the topic in her textbook, and I just love her perspective. So, Suzanne, thank you for being willing to share some of that with us today. And I'm really curious, like why, or not necessarily where, but why do you see asset information management being? It's such a great time to kind of crack that nut, right, and really cover it in detail with people. Why is now the right time?
Well, I think first of all is to understand that a lot of people have started their asset management journey and they're somewhere on the spectrum of starting, improving, maturing, somewhere along that line. And it is to understand that all of asset management is actually realized through asset information management. And so if you actually don't have your asset information management set up in a way that it can support decision making. So if we start from the beginning, your asset management strategy is realized through asset management decision making. If you don't have the right information, timely information that lends itself to decision making, then exactly what you're doing, nobody knows. And so it is one part decision making. The other part of it is that which is also a part of decision making is understanding how risks develop, how they materialize for the assets, around the assets, and related to the organization that the assets have to respond to. And so all of this information, again, how do you get visibility about risks? It is through asset information. And so once you get onto your asset management journey, then you'll realize really quickly that, okay, I need to also work on asset information management. And it's certainly the way that we work with our clients. We don't wait to get way down the road and then pull back to start to look at asset information management. As soon as you get your journey started, then you have to start to look at asset information management. Now, a big part of the issues surrounding asset information management is that it is not all controlled by the organization. The reality is that much of where your asset information comes from to start your assets and to get them going actually comes from outside of the organization. So it is bigger than the company in that you also have to now start to partner with your engineering firms, your construction firms, and so on, to make sure that you have the asset data and that you're not running into what we call technical debt, in that operations is now stuck with the expense and all the effort that is needed to find this asset information, all because it wasn't handed over at the acquisition and conceptualization stage and even implementation stage of the assets.
See, I love that you tie that to the life cycle, not just because of the name of the webinar, but and not just because I do life cycle stuff for a living, but because I think it shows how important the whole life approach to asset information really is, right? So can you expand a little bit? And this is just my, me being selfish again, good question that I've always wondered. Um, how invaluable is it that you get the information as early in the life cycle as possible in your eyes?
Well, the thing with asset information is that it A predates the physical assets on your facility, and B, it outlives it as well. So you actually need to get it way before your physical assets show up. And this is why this interaction needs to start to happen now. So this partnership between the organizations and their supply chain and their engineering firms and their construction firms need to be tight enough in a way that the requirements for this information, they're actually defined way up when you start to think about the assets. Because as you know, the things that you're able to change about the assets get incrementally harder as phases of the life cycle progresses. So things that you can change in conceptualization stage, you can't change it later on. So you want to make sure that your supply chain will support you getting that information before the asset actually shows up on the plant. Now, the reality is that most people who are putting in infrastructure and equipment actually get their information after commissioning, after the assets have been handed over, and not even the same time, but probably months after, when whoever their installers are go back and tidy up their paperwork. That is too late. And that is a part of what creates the risks for the organization. So think about if you're commissioning, I love to use pumps. Oh my goodness. Love pumps. So think about if you're commissioning a pump and you start to have some problems with vibration, and you want to compare to the baseline vibration reading, but then you don't have that information. You're starting from scratch. You don't know what that is. That is the reality of it. So you want to make sure that you set up your processes and your systems to get that information as early as possible. Now, I'm saying this in a few sentences, but I want to tell you that this is a very difficult process to achieve, because it means that you have to have all of your requirements defined. You have to reorient your supply chain systems. You have to redefine what contracts your vendors get to do these works for you. So it's not a simple process, and it's not something that singly a company can do, or one engineer in a company can do. The entire organization has to be reoriented to define that process to achieve this.
So if I'm correct me if I'm wrong in my understanding, but you're saying that you want to embed these requirements in your contracts before you engage in
You have to be.
agreements, right?
Oh, you have to. You have
Yes.
to. And this is probably the first part of where companies fall down. They don't actually specify their requirements. They get the information anyhow, and then when the information comes, they are the ones that have to go through the expense of either remining the information or changing it to what it needs to be. Now, I can tell you, I've had the experience of living in an English-speaking country and buying, I won't say the language of where we bought the equipment from because it's going to be too obvious, but buying a piece of equipment from a company in a country that did not speak English, and they sent all the manuals in the language that they spoke. And when we asked for the English manuals, they then turn around and ask us to pay to translate them. So the very, very simple thing of even the language that you want these documents to be in. I've also seen that we've gotten drawings in one version of AutoCAD that we didn't have. And, some of these software are not backward compatible. So you have to specify even to what version you want. If things are going to be supplied electronically, what version of software, everything has to be specified. If you want your equipment to be specified in metric, if you want your equipment to be specified in another in imperial, you have to specify it, because dimensions should technically not be converted.
Wow, that's huge. And let me make sure I can read this right. Yep, Jitesh just
Jitesh.
left us a comment on this point, right? So this is where he believes that every organization should have configuration management plans, which not only define the baseline for every asset, information, and documentation, but also ensures validity.
Correct. So there is configuration management plan. I absolutely agree with you, Jitesh. You absolutely should have that. There is also, so configuration management plan will manage how that information changes across the life cycle. But then there is your asset information management system that defines all of this, starting out from your strategy and what you want. And this is why, just adding to what Jitesh is saying, this is why this is not something that one person is doing in an organization. That's why we start with strategy, because the organization itself has to decide to do things this way.
Oh, I'm sorry, I was muted. They need to be intentional, right? So
They need to be intentional, and this is something that's also going to involve external stakeholders. So one person at the bottom of the totem pole in the organization can't go yelling about this. That's just going to get that person's neck chopped off. That's all that's going to do.
that's right. Yeah, and we've I've been bit by this point that you're talking about, where we didn't have the requirement specified for subcontractors and vendors, and the government had a contract with us that we had to provide engineering tech data and logistics product data, and this is all asset information, and we had to generate some of it from thin air because we didn't have the requirement between us and the vendors well established, and so it was a lot of backtracking to try and establish some of that. And as you stated, some of them were willing to help us without additional funding, but others were not.
And that's a challenge. That's really the challenge. I mean, I've also seen people like planners on plant spend oodles and oodles amount of time collecting field data from information that they should have received to set up the system when the asset was being bought. And it's you have to understand, like, the depth to which this needs to go in your organization. For example, I worked with a company that was good enough to have a design criteria and specify the type of PLC and the version of PLC that they wanted. However, that particular document was only sent out when they were buying a PLC as an asset. They did not ensure that this document was attached also to all mechanical equipment being bought. And guess what? You buy a compressor system today, a big enough one, it has its own PLC. What happens when you're in North America, which means you're likely to use one particular brand of PLC, and then you buy that compressor system from Europe, which uses another brand of PLC, but that was able to come in and enter the plant because nobody specified and sent that information out, that whenever a PLC is being supplied, whether it's being supplied as an asset itself or as a part of or as a component in another asset, then it needs to be XYZ. You have to understand the depth to which all of this penetrates and be able to tighten up on all of those loopholes.
Yeah, that's huge. And Jitesh dropped a great follow up. He gave you a pat on the back. Suzane, can you see these comments when I share them? I can't tell.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Jitesh. It's actually coming right across the screen, so I'm sitting here feeling pretty nice. Thank you, Jitesh.
Perfect. Yeah, and Jitesh, let me tell you something. I am extremely grateful that you're participating, because that was the whole point of this, is to get people together with Suzane and sometimes with me, so we can interact and share lessons learned. And so if anyone else would like to make a comment or ask a question, please feel free to enter it in the chat, and we'll share it with the group. So, Suzane, I think it's really important for I think we get lost in the comment about data these days, right? Everyone's fixated on data, generating data, capturing data, cleaning data, but what I don't feel like there's a good grasp on, at least in the conversations that I'm seeing and hearing, is the conversion of data to information, right? Because data is just observation and measurement and capture.
Right.
We convert that into information, right? Can you talk a little bit about that conversion of data to information and maybe some lessons learned?
Yeah. So a big part of how data becomes information is by passing it through your standards. And this is where, unfortunately, a lot of companies fall down because they don't actually have their information standards. They're usually fully aware of what ISO 14224 says, or even what ISO 55001 says about asset information. However, not very aware of what their own information standards are. And so companies have to then put these standards in, because it is these standards that then take that data and make it into something useful, right? So if you look at what is happening with the assets, you can measure things all day anyhow. So you can go out and you can measure vibration, you can measure thickness, you can measure anything you want. Do you have a standard that then says thickness between X and Y is good, bad, indifferent, requires further action? And that is when it becomes useful information. So part of what really, I think, irks people on the shop floor is that they are usually the ones tasked with collecting data. And we send them out all day, every day to collect data on this, collect data on that, and they do it all day, every day. And then we do absolutely nothing with it,
Yeah.
and then they just stop. And then one day the equipment blows up, poof, and we say, where is the data? Where is that data that you should have been collecting? Why weren't you collecting it? And then they'll tell you, but we stopped 4 years ago and nobody noticed because you weren't doing anything with it anyway. So we have to be able to make that connection by developing good asset information standards so that the data that we're collecting makes sense. Who said we were supposed to collect that data in the first place? What do we have? It actually starts from your strategy. Do you have a strategy about what decisions you're gonna be making, and from what decisions you're gonna be making, then what information you need to support that, and then what data you need to support that information? Again, another place that most people fall down. I guarantee you, there are companies out there that are just looking at shiny things, new software, AI, big data, or machine learning, all of those things, and they've skipped past the basics of their strategy and their standards.
Yeah, you got to master the fundamentals, right? Like, I think, so we used to refer to that as shelfware. We would have people go and take all this data. I mean, spend all this time gathering data. Then they would develop a report off of the information, and they would hand this report to people it wasn't actionable. There was really nothing to do with it.
Right.
But they had captured a bunch of data that we had gathered and made some assumptions off of it. And then it would get folded up in a binder and put on a shelf somewhere. As we called it, shelfware, right?
Right. So either shelfware or C13. That was the other one we used to say. File it in C13.
What's C13?
The bin.
That's the trash.
The trash. The garbage.
That's hilarious. So C13, I'm showing
shelfware or file it in C13.
Why C13?
I have no idea. I thought it was an army thing, but I have no idea.
It might be. That's pretty funny. I'm with you. I think that one of the things was trying to get across in my last conversation on asset information management was that there are more people willing to give you tools to generate, capture, and store data than there are people that can tell you what to do with the data in the right way once you have it, right? Like you
Right.
can't you can't you can't put your shoes on without pulling a vendor out of your shoe that was in the way that sells software for data collection. And you go to these conferences and it's, like you said, everyone's trying to, play the AI or CBM plus or whatever. And we're sometimes think in the military space that we're behind the curve, behind industry in some places because we haven't embraced some of that. But in reality, we haven't established full spectrum requirements for some of our assets because of other
Right.
reasons like security or whatever. Um, but my team is developing different types of technologies to help us with sustaining assets. And one of those things is a partner of mine, Dr. Katie Castell. She's brilliant. She's doing great things with the Project Blue. And Project
Awesome.
Blue is helping us develop a digital twin of the submarine for sustainment purposes.
Right. Right. Right.
And one of the reasons I think that's so valuable is because the people we chose to partner with at Beast Code and Amentum and a couple of other places have really kind of kept the end point in view, right? Like this has to provide value to the end user, the deck plate maintainer, the maintenance planners.
Right.
It's not just to say we have a digital twin. And I think a lot of places invest in something because they're told it's something they should have, but they don't really understand what the value proposition of that thing is. And they
Right.
fail to realize that that product of asset information is an asset, right?
That's precisely so. And it is that is an asset. Your systems are assets. And usually when you go into people's wherever they have their assets listed, those are two things that you never ever see in there. You see all the pumps in there. I really like pumps. A lot of pumps in there, but not anything about anything else. And so what I always say, start at the beginning. And you're not gonna achieve much if you want to circumvent and take shortcuts and so on, because you will actually not have the guiding principle behind what the organization is doing. So start at the beginning, get your information strategy and get that done, because that is what is going to support your asset management strategy and link to the decisions that you're trying to make. Um, another, we talk about information. Here is one thing that we do a lot. So if you talk about, for example, asset hierarchy, I love to pick on asset hierarchy.
Mm-hmm.
Now we all know that we should do an asset hierarchy. Then the next thing, that if we let some people in the organization run away with this, then they define it down to, and I used to be one of those persons, so I can tell you exactly what we would do. We would then take it all the way down to what we call the least maintainable part. And I actually know that. I know the acronym for it, LMP, because I used to do it so much. But then you have to stop and ask yourself, from the strategic perspective, is that information useful to the organization? Is that least maintainable part, is it an asset or is it a component of an asset? So then you get into what is an asset. So because we're all going to disagree about what is an asset, mechanical people are going to say the pump system is an asset. The electrical counterpart is going to say the motor is an asset. Then comes along the automation guys, and they're going to say, like, every gizmo that I put on it, those are assets. And so if you let all of us write assets, then all of those things are going to be in there. And then by the time IT comes around, you let them use the same system. Every keyboard and mouse would also be an asset. So you have to now figure out what exactly is an asset in the organization. And you can't just figure it out in your head, right? I like that, Mikhail. Mikhail, I really, really like that. You can't just figure it out in your head. You have to define it and agree it in the organization Under what circumstances does something become an asset? And if it's not an asset, boom, it does not go on the asset hierarchy. And these are things that organizations have to sit down and do, that whilst us as consultants will help you to get to that place, that's our role. We can't tell you what that is. You have to say what that is.
Yeah, and we have kind of we have the same problems in the military space, and I usually try to tie it to criticality, right? So if you have, because essentially when we build a ship, we build a building with assets in it. The
Right.
building being the ship, the hull. And so even the hull itself is an asset, and has some level of structural hierarchy. But in reality, we don't do a lot of like local work with hull and structure. That's something for more advanced maintenance when we go to larger availabilities. So we have a lot of disagreements about what is an asset, right? And I think one of the points that you've made that I really really like is the relationship of hierarchy. And you may or may not know a little something about criticality assessment.
A little something.
A little something. You may have written a book about it.
A little
And
one.
and I think a lot of what people fail to realize is the asset has to provide some specifically identified value to the
Right.
organization for it to classify as an asset, and for
Right.
its failure and criticality to resonate with the organization, right? Um, I
Correct.
I had handrails all over the ship. They were a safety thing.
Right.
But you couldn't find an LRU listing, a line replacement unit listing for handrails.
Right.
There was no point in doing a hierarchy for them, but my main engines, very specifically, right? So there was,
Right.
all those things were very important, and they cost money, and they had safety attached to them, and they were just too simple. They were just too simple. They didn't, paint them,
Correct.
inspect them.
No, and this doesn't mean that these other things are not components that are recognized within the system, but there are rules around components. The condition under which something becomes a component, the condition under which something is an asset, and you have to also set rules for how many levels of assets that you will have. And this is precisely what we call asset information standards. So these are just examples. So when you figured this out, then it has to also be documented, because if you are not around and somebody in the organization has to do it, it needs to be a process that can be replicated, a process that can be duplicated without your involvement. So when we talk about quality of information, because that is the other point of this. This is why we're doing all of this, to make sure that we have quality information. Then the same person repeating that process. So if I'm doing this hierarchy and I'm doing it again 5 years from now, or doing it in another team, then I should come up with the same results. Somebody else using the standards should then come up with the same results.
Hmm.
So if you don't actually have standards, you introduce a lot of risks into the organization. And that is the reality. Without the standards, no guiding point, no standards, no strategy, no guiding point. Ship, what do you say out there? Ship afloat, no harm, no,
Adrift, yeah.
it's adrift,
Yeah.
nothing to hold on to, because there is nothing to guide the organization. And that is where a lot of the risk comes in, and a lot of things become vulnerable. You look at even how things are named, other types of standards that you should have. You see the thing called a screw conveyor? How many names? What do you call it? In some places, it's called a screw. I've been on plants where it was called a worm.
Yep.
I've been on plants where it was called a screw conveyor. So now if you go into the system, so let those three people go and name that asset in the system, what would they have? One guy would just put worm, left hand side worm, right hand side worm. One guy would put screw conveyor. And there's yet another name for it. Somebody might put conveyor, comma, screw. All of these things. Variation is probably the enemy of a lot of what we do in asset management. So we need to have good standards around the information.
Yeah, and I like your point on variation because I mean, even today I was working in a work group with a very large, complex, spreadsheet. Yay, spreadsheets! And the whole time we're working in this thing, and we've got it on this massive, like 75-inch TV, and there's like 6 people in the room. The whole time we're looking at this spreadsheet, I'm thinking, my God, there's so much on this one sheet, and thank God there's not a lot of words on it. That it's
Right.
mostly numbers because when we were looking at some of the entries that were word entries versus numerical, you could see inconsistencies, here and there and there. And all I kept thinking was, man, that's gonna give you hell when you start filtering out information.
Yep. You
You
know,
know?
I have good experience with spreadsheets too that I can tell you to be avoided at all costs. Like
Right?
spreadsheets, good for calculating stuff. Do not use to store data
That's right.
because when I was a maintenance engineer back in the day, I used to have to do something called deferral and amortization of maintenance costs, which is like capitalization of it across the
Hmm.
number of years, right? And every single time that the spreadsheet went to finance, they would say to me, Suzanne, good job, but I don't know what you did, but something from 2 years ago is missing and it has thrown off the balance of the sheet. So spreadsheets, good for calculating, good for building. I think it's probably the most powerful or second most powerful software that Microsoft has. Thank you, Amy. Most powerful software that Microsoft has. It's probably Excel followed by projects or something like that, you know. But please don't use it to store data because the
Yes,
first thing that everybody does with a spreadsheet that is sent to them is that they save a copy to their C drive, and that's the end of it.
that's it.
That's
Yeah,
the end of all data quality right there.
I used to tell my guys, Excel is not a database.
No,
You know?
it looks logical because of all the rows and columns, but don't do it.
Yeah, and there are some extremely powerful examples of spreadsheets that do amazing stuff, but you have to really, really be careful and sensitive. And it's almost like a one-man show, right? So I actually have a few counterparts, not just academic, even though they are PhDs, that created Monte Carlo simulations in spreadsheets.
Oh, yes, those things can be done, but just
Yeah.
remember those colleagues that you mentioned, I'm pretty certain that you know their names and they fit on one hand. Generally the rest of us that are on plant, we're average people.
Hmm.
We're doing average things with Excel. We're not set up to keep all of those Excel sheets straight, especially when data gets into hundreds of cells and thousands of cells,
Yeah, yeah. Um, I like Michael's comment. Asset management's gone enterprise, right?
Yeah, and we talk about ERP. So ERP is enterprise resource planning software.
Yep.
That's a good one. One thing to understand as well, in support of what Michael is saying, is that it is not one system that you're gonna have. So a lot of companies already have it set up that their ERP is different from their CMMS. What is important is that you know what is where, you know what information is to be where, that it is properly defined, and you have your standards and your strategy to define and back up all the information that you put anywhere. That's the important thing. Because once your company gets to be a certain size, I mean, my company is so small and I already use a ton of software. So all of your information is not going to be in a single place, but it needs to be known where the information is at.
Right. So, in the sense of running an asset information management program, right? Like, taking a very intentional look at managing all these multiple enterprise systems. What's kind of like what's your recommendation for a program manager who's putting all these pieces in place? Yeah, my approach has always been that if you want sponsorship and you want funding for these types of things and you want corporate support, you have to tie them to business values. You have to tie them to some type of business driver. And once you get that established, you feel like you've done, God's work because it's so hard. But you've just gotten started. Now you have to put this program in place that truly serves all the people that touch it. What's kind of, do you have any like quick pointers or suggestions for people that are establishing these programs for the first time?
So, other people have gone ahead of us and have done the work, and they've put it into standards. We have the GFMAM, Global Forum for Maintenance and Asset Management. They have a landscape. We have ISO 55000 family of standards. And we also have other standards like the IAM anatomy and so on that really tell you that the gold standard, or let me say the platinum standard for doing this, is to have an asset information management system that includes 4 things. 1, your strategy. 2, your information standards. 3, your definition of what your asset information systems are going to be, and 4, data and information management. And this is kind of what we go through in the course and break it down step by step, much more than we can do in on this show, but we break it down step by step for everybody to see how you approach each of those, and then how you tie it back to the organization. And that is also why we start with strategy. Yeah. So you start with strategy because that is where you're defining what you need and so on and so forth. But the important thing about strategy is that once you then define something as a strategy, it includes senior management, it includes business objectives, it includes all of those things that it has to be aligned with. And that is where you start and how you start to get what we call executive sponsorship. That's the reality of how that works. So if you don't do those things with your senior leadership from beginning, then all that you're essentially doing after that is just buying software, and you're not going to get any more support than that because they weren't involved.
Right. Yeah. And hey, look, this software is not cheap,
Well, you see, people talk about ERPs. None of the software, none of those software are cheap to begin with. The reason that they're not cheap, and we hit software a lot, but all of these softwares are incredibly powerful and do tremendous things. Most of the reasons that they don't do tremendous things for the client organization is not actually the software, and nor is it the software vendor's fault. It is usually the information required and the data required to sustain it, the standards and so on, that even the vendors will ask you, show me your asset information strategy, show me your standards so that we can know what we're going to build towards. Most organizations do not have these. And that is why when the expensive software goes in, it actually doesn't deliver.
Well, I heard that I could just buy software and it would solve the problems for me.
Yes.
I'm kidding. So many people say that. They're like, oh, software won't solve your problem. But then people turn around and buy software and they don't use it.
But you know what? As I was joking with a friend probably a couple of days ago, and I said, we choose one of the hardest ways to make a living. We are in the business of separating people from their ideas, and that's a very, very hard thing to do. It's very, very, it is an easier thing to try to separate them from their money. And the people who have mastered how to separate people from their money will, get a lot richer than people like me and do a lot better financially, because we have chosen the more difficult path of separating people from their ideas, and it's just tough to get people to sit down and do all of this planning and thinking when shiny things are passing on the side as well. But I'm in touch with quite a few software vendors, and they're asking for these things now.
Yeah.
So it's not going to be such an easy street, to just get them to sell you the software. They're asking for these standards. They're asking for your asset information management system and so on and so forth now.
Yeah, and do you feel like they're doing that because they want to get more insight about their customer base, or do you feel like they're genuinely interested in making sure that you are ready for the software and you have a healthy program and that you're going to have the right program for the right problem, right? Like I think a lot of times, they think they've picked the right software solution, and then come to find out, the vendor discovers that they're actually looking for another thing, and they actually, in many cases offer that thing as well. So do you feel like that's the same thing for you, what you observe?
I think the software vendors are genuinely trying to figure out how to make their software really, really help the organizations, because there's no point us all being a part of a failing project, right? Nobody wins if the company doesn't actually utilize the software the way that it's intended and get the benefits that they're supposed to get. So I think they're genuinely expanding their approach beyond the software, but to ensure that the software actually delivers the value that it's supposed to deliver. Um, and part of it might be that they're probably just darn tired of getting slapped around the back for just selling shiny things. Uh, I'm sure they do a lot more than that. I'm sorry, all my friends in the software business, they do a lot more than that. And the thing that I can honestly tell you is that the softwares that are coming out now, and even from 20 years ago, they are tremendously powerful.
Yeah.
Everything that they tell you at the conference that the software can do, it can do and it will do. It just might not do it for you if you don't put your asset information system in place, your management system in place to support it. But it can do that. They all can do that, you know.
Right.
They have different scales at which they work and different things, but they can all do that, you know.
So, I think your point's great because when I was working an acquisition for a military service that will go unnamed, they uh, they had purchased a CBM Plus program for this ship that we had designed for them.
Yeah.
And I went to them and said, "Hey, we're going to give you some extremely powerful software, and we're integrating 100 and 100 and whatever, 110, 115 sensors into this really small area of the vessel to capture all this data on these critical systems. But where's your program that you're going to apply to this? Where's your CDM Plus program? Where's your controls?
Right.
What are your processes post data extraction? Nothing. They had no clue. So they had paid for all this technical capability, but they had no programmatic support.
Right.
And I told them, I said, look, this is quasi okay because you're setting yourself up for something in the future, which is great. You can build
Right.
a program to this. However, I fear that the worst a worst case is someone who already has a plant that
Right.
isn't involved in the design, that
Right.
retroactively goes and buys software to help them solve their data and information management problems, and they don't outfit the physical assets properly to suit the
Right.
software solution,
Right.
or they fail to see the investment, right?
Yeah. I mean, we've had, like, when I was on the asset owning side, we had people who would come in and show us dashboards. You buy this dashboard and it will show you operations, it will show you maintenance, it will show you all of this. And I remember I was dealing with an outage at the time, and one of the guys said, and it of course could track your outage data and so on, and it would show to top management so that they didn't have to come and ask you, what's the status of the outage and so on. Now, the backside of that has to be built in is, where does that information come from to give you those pretty charts? Do you anywhere in the business have this information digitized already that supports that particular thing. So, do you have that information digitized? Is there an interface that already supports the information from operations so that we can see all our temperatures and pressures, see all the output, how much cement the kiln is producing every hour? Do you already have that digitized and ready to go? Do you already have all the information about vibration, about this, about that? Do you have those things so that we can layer a dashboard on top of it? And this is again another area where these things fall down, because in the planning to acquire those systems, you have to consider what information it needs to feed it and where that information is going to come from, and whether as the organization you have the capability to support that. So you mentioned the programmatic side of it. Do we have the capability to support this information on a continual basis, or is it that some of our information will be on demand, some will be continuous? Everything has to be defined and laid out properly. I see Michael has a question about
Yeah.
the IAM chapter. Michael, can I hit you up afterwards on LinkedIn about it? I'll do that for you. Let's connect on LinkedIn and I'll send you some information about the chapter.
Very cool. All right. So look, Suzanne, look at the clock. Look at the clock. Can you believe I could do this all night. This is great. And normally I'm by myself, so I'm like, I'm going to do 30 minutes and then I'm going to stop because people don't want to hear me talk for even that long. But with you here, it's been amazing, and I'm so glad that we've been able to, extract some of that wisdom from your brain. And I would be remiss if I didn't reference the very book. I don't know where I found this. It may have a signature in it.
It may. So, yeah. So that's the book, and then I guess the most. I wonder if that's a picture of me just there doing the unicycle thing. I don't know.
It may be. It may be. And so for those that aren't familiar, could you give me like a quick 30-second primer on the book and what it's about?
Yeah. So in the book Risk-Based Asset Criticality Assessment, what I do is I take a look at, first of all, I worked on the premise that people already know that they need to do asset criticality. I think everybody knows that that's kind of an important thing to do. I think what was really lacking in industry was, okay, I'm gonna do one. Exactly what do I do? So I set out to write it in a handbook kind of format, so that it would give you step-by-step instructions how to think about your company without me telling what you should have in your criticality methodology. So we look at, how do you find out what the business drivers are for your organization, and then how do you rank those, how do you weight them, and then how do you decide what asset drivers you're going to use, and then combine them. So some people don't really want such a dynamic process. Some people prefer a static process, in which case the business driver part of it is sufficient, and people go through and look at really how to go from business drivers to consequences of failure, and to set that up, and then try to understand what your risk what your risk appetite is for the organization, and of course how that ties in with your risk tolerance. So that's really, I think, the gist of what the book covers. I always get excited when I see it. I remember all the tempest that I went through to get the cover design, and the fantastic job that the publisher did with the ideas that I sent. And believe me, that little person holding up that kind of bar, that balance bar, is exactly how exactly how I imagined it. So, and it really drives home, I think, for people in the organization, that really consequence of failure is one thing, but what your especially the business side of the organization is interested in is really risk.
Yep. Yeah, I'm going to be guilty of saying it again, but I tell every one of my program and project management students and clients that risk is the blanket that covers everything. And
Yes.
every decision we make under the blanket of risk. So it's great being able to look at risk through different lenses and different perspectives and understanding different ways to qualify and quantify risk. And I think your book, so I'm going to brag on it for just a second as someone who's read it, but read it cold. I didn't really know a whole lot about Suzane professionally when I read this book. And I had known Suzane through our network and gotten to know the surface of her work, but I hadn't ever been a client of Suzane's. And so I had never been the recipient of one of her assessments. And so when I read the book, I was like, this is fantastic because it's so easy to understand and it's right to the point, but your grasp of the language and the way you portray the message is just is perfect.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think that's really valuable for people of all languages because I think it benefits a lot of people that have English as a second or even a third language. It's written in a way that you don't just have to be a nerd like me to understand it.
Yeah, and I really did set out to write a simple book. I'm sorry if anybody finds it too simple, but I did set out to write a simple. Yeah, there are those amongst us who like things complicated. I
Nah.
am sometimes guilty, but I set out to write a simple handbook, and I also wanted to carefully manage the size because I wanted it to be the kind of book that you would pick up, go on a flight, and by the time that 3 hour flight is over, you should be done with the book. And that's kind of what I set out to do. So I'm pretty pleased that I accomplished that, and it's not complicated. It's easy for people to understand. I wanted people to walk away from the book understanding criticality, but also understanding that it is one part of asset risks. Asset risks are multidimensional. It is one part of what should be your whole risk management approach for the enterprise. That's one part of it. There are many other elements of it. And so I wanted them to walk away feeling that connection with their business standards, feeling the connection with ISO 55000, feeling the connection with ISO 31000, and I think I touch on ISO 14224 a bit as well. So and to sum up everything that we've been talking about, because this is really about asset information management. That's why you brought me here. To sum that up, your criticality methodology is one of your information standards that you should have in the organization. So that's just the other part of it. But I'm really happy to be here, Luke. It's been a tremendous opportunity. Like you, I could talk about this all day, every day. This and more we cover in a lot more details in the course. If anybody is interested in learning more about asset information management, we cover this in the kind of detail. And the thing that I'm pleased about with the course is that we don't just stop at thought leadership. We really go into practical information that you can apply in your organization.
That's right.
As you go through. As a matter of fact, I had one person who was taking the course immediately as they reached module 3. They didn't even get to module 4. As they reached module 3, they then said, you know what? I've learned so much already, and I'm able to apply this to my organization.
I'm going to post the link to the course that you're talking about.
Okay.
Right here in the captions.
Yeah. Amy, thank you so much. Michael, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Please, Michael, connect with me afterwards on LinkedIn, and let's talk a little bit more about the branch, the Manitoba branch, and we'll see. Amy, I really appreciate you thinking about me in this way and the book. And thank you so much for coming online.
Yeah, so I'm gonna tell you, you are officially a sailor now because you met Amy. Now, Amy and I have known each other for almost 20 years. She
Oh, wow.
was an electrician, yeah, in the Coast Guard with me many, 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 many years ago. And she's just an amazing person. And to show you how supportive she is, she
Very.
she, she came to this not knowing what the heck we were going to talk about. Just seeing the availability of the feed on Facebook. So,
Oh, this is great.
yeah, I think you got yourself a new fan there. Amy's awesome. She's the kind of person that's cool to have around, around to help problem solving. So. Um, all
Uh,
right. So, Suzanne, I can't thank you enough. One, for being officially the first true guest. And I'm only doing this publicly so we can give Jesus a hard time later on because Jesus and I did a joint session. And so I think he's going to claim the flag, but we didn't have this fancy setup when Jesus and I did it. We did have some fake beach background going there.
oh, I remember that. As you mentioned the background, I remember that.
Yeah,
Oh,
it was.
isn't he amazing too? Amazing,
Yeah,
amazing,
it
amazing.
was great. And so, for those that aren't familiar with Suzanne and how to reach her, she's very active on LinkedIn. Suzanne, do you want to talk a little bit about how people should contact you?
So you can contact me via the organization's website, which is greemanassetmanagement.com. You can also, the easiest way to reach me and to get almost an immediate response is on LinkedIn. If you connect with me, send me a message on LinkedIn. We have three kind of footprints on LinkedIn. I'm there, the company's there, but also the Greeman Asset Management Academy is there as well. And that's where we talk about courses. So you can find us. You can find us anyway. I'm very, very responsive. And I also rarely do I ever turn away a connection. I accept almost all connections. And you'll know the few reasons that I don't, but I accept connections and I stay in touch with people and so on. So reach out, connect with me, and we can always chat about asset management. That really is my passion. It's my business as well. I'm an asset management consultant. That's what the firm does, and we're also asset management educators.
That's right. And we're blessed to have you, Suzanne. And thank you so much for imparting your wisdom on us tonight, sharing so much about your world of work and your expertise, and for bringing all these great commenters to the episode, because I'm sure they came here to hang out with you and not me.
And you know what? Jatesh kicked it off and got us going. So I have to, as we'd say in Jamaica, big up Jatesh. So thank you so much, Jatesh, for getting us going. And thanks to you as well, Luke, because I had the strategy for the organization was that I was not doing as much public facing. Actually, the number was 0 public facing events for the first half of the year. So I'm slowly coming out now. So thank you so much for pulling me out of my shell. We did get what we wanted done in the organization, which was a bit of strategy and planning. We wanted to focus on that. So we did get that done. So thank you for pulling me out
Yes,
of
ma'am.
and getting me on my first event.
I was going to say, somehow I'm going to find a way for us to capture all of that brilliance you just exhibited this last 6 months. A tremendous amount of self-control.
It's not easy.
Let me tell you guys, she turned down a lot of offers to do things that entrepreneurs are usually like, I have to do all this stuff. And she was so disciplined. And I cannot tell you how much you taught me when you did that, because it made me think, wow, like this is really how it should be done. So, kudos to you for doing that. So.
Thank you so much. And part of it was working for you. The courses were really important to get done. And you said I had to get them done by a certain date. You gave me a deadline. So I couldn't be, here, there, and everywhere fluffing my feathers like a peacock when I had real work to be done. So, I had to keep my head down. There's quite also a bit of business planning that had to be done. So we just had to keep our heads down and do that.
Yeah. And now the world can benefit from your hard work because AM 101's launched. AM 103 is amazing. I'm not gonna throw out any spoilers right now, but I see
But
other
it's
things in
coming.
the background.
It's coming.
Okay, Suzane, any last words?
No, just thank you. It's been tremendous. I think the audience was very, very interactive. I was
Yeah.
surprised to see as many comments as I saw, and I'm just happy to be in a space that I can share and learn from the audience as well. Jitesh gave the feedback about configuration management, which is something that we deal with quite a bit. So good to see such in-depth comments coming through from the audience.
Yes, ma'am. I couldn't be happier. I'm usually talking to myself, and then later on, my 10-year-old will make a comment on YouTube, and then her friend will weigh in, and then I'm like, "Hey guys, it's Daddy." So, all right. Well, thank you so much, Suzanne, for joining us. Maddie, I'll talk to you over comments next week. And again, everyone, thank you so much for joining us and weighing in because you added so much to our experience. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Have an amazing night.
You too.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.